In the early morning hours of June 30, 1908, the world witnessed an event that remains one of the most profound scientific mysteries of the modern era. Deep within the remote and rugged wilderness of central Siberia, near the stony Tunguska River, a quiet summer dawn was suddenly shattered by a celestial intruder. It began as a brilliant streak of bluish-white light, brighter than the sun itself, tearing across the sky from the southeast to the northwest. For the few witnesses in the sparsely populated region, mostly indigenous hunters and nomadic reindeer herders, it felt as though the very heavens had split open. The object, a massive bolide traveling at tens of thousands of miles per hour, compressed the air in front of it with such incredible force that it generated temperatures reaching thousands of degrees. As the object descended toward the Earth, it did not strike the ground. Instead, several miles above the surface, the immense pressure and heat caused the intruder to disintegrate in a colossal aerial explosion. The energy released in that single second was equivalent to 15 megatons of high explosives, a force over 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb that would later be dropped on Hiroshima. A massive shockwave radiated outward, flattening over 80 million trees across an area of 2,000 square kilometers. The forest was pushed down in a perfect radial pattern, with the trunks pointing away from the center of the blast like spokes on a wheel. The heat was so intense that it ignited fires across the landscape, while the sound of the explosion was heard more than 500 miles away, shaking windows and knocking people off their feet in distant villages. The atmospheric impact was felt globally. In London, Stockholm, and Berlin, the night sky was illuminated by a strange, ethereal glow for several days after June 30, 1908. The high-altitude dust and ice crystals scattered the sunlight so effectively that people in Europe could read a newspaper outdoors at midnight without the need for a lamp. Yet despite the global scale of the disturbance, the remote location of the event meant that the outside world would remain ignorant of the true nature of the disaster for nearly 2 decades. The wilderness held its secret tightly, hidden behind walls of fallen timber and treacherous swamps, waiting for the first explorers to arrive and witness the scarred face of the Earth. For nearly 20 years, the secrets of the 1908 explosion remained buried under the snow and silence of the Siberian wilderness. It was not until the year 1921 that a dedicated mineralogist named Leonid Kulik began to piece together the scattered reports of the event. He was convinced that a massive iron meteorite had struck the Earth, leaving behind a fortune in precious metals and a giant crater that would rival the famous landmarks of the world. However, the journey to the site was a monumental challenge. The region was one of the most inaccessible places on the planet, protected by endless miles of frozen taiga, mosquito-infested swamps, and mountain ridges that had never been mapped. After several failed attempts and years of gathering government support, Kulik finally led a full scientific expedition into the heart of the Tunguska region in 1927. The journey was a brutal test of human endurance. The team traveled by horse and sled, then by foot, hacking their way through dense undergrowth and navigating treacherous rivers. When they finally reached the epicenter of the blast, Kulik and his men were met with a sight that defied all their expectations. They reached a high ridge and looked down upon a vast, circular valley where millions of trees lay perfectly flat, their silvered trunks pointing toward a single point in the distance. It looked like a graveyard of giants. However, as they approached the very center of the destruction, they found something even more baffling. There was no massive crater. There was no giant hole in the earth where a meteorite had landed. Instead, they found a strange grove of trees that were still standing perfectly upright, though their branches and bark had been completely stripped away by the heat, leaving them looking like a forest of telephone poles. Kulik spent months in the wilderness, living in primitive wooden huts and enduring the biting cold of the Siberian winter. He searched every inch of the central marshland for fragments of space rock, digging deep into the frozen mud and draining small ponds, but he found nothing. The lack of a crater was a scientific nightmare that contradicted everything the experts believed about cosmic impacts. The expedition members began to experience a sense of deep unease as they realized the laws of physics they understood did not seem to apply to this place. The scorched earth and the peculiar pattern of the fallen trees suggested that the explosion had happened in the air, a concept that was revolutionary at the time. The mystery, instead of being solved, had only grown deeper, fueling decades of speculation and wonder about what had truly descended from the stars in 1908. As the years passed and multiple expeditions returned from the taiga with empty hands, the scientific community began to fracture into a dozen different camps. The fact that the 1908 event left no physical remnants of a meteorite led many to look for explanations far beyond the traditional boundaries of astronomy. By the middle of the century, the Tunguska mystery had moved from the pages of scientific journals into the realm of global folklore. One of the most captivating and controversial ideas emerged after the events of 1945, when researchers noticed striking similarities between the damage in Siberia and the aftermath of nuclear explosions. The way the central trees remained standing while everything around them was flattened resembled the ground zero of a modern atomic blast. This led to the wild and enduring speculation that a nuclear-powered spacecraft from another world had suffered a catastrophic engine failure just before reaching the surface of the Earth. Other scientists proposed even more exotic possibilities that pushed the limits of theoretical physics. Some suggested that a microscopic black hole had collided with the Earth, passing through the planet like a needle through silk and exiting somewhere in the North Atlantic. Others argued that the world had encountered a wandering clump of antimatter, which annihilated instantly upon contact with our atmosphere, leaving behind nothing but a colossal burst of pure energy and light. There were even stories among the local indigenous people of a visitation by a fire god named Ogdi, who had come to punish the world by tearing down the forest and bringing a heat that could melt stone. Each new theory seemed to capture a different aspect of the mystery, yet none could fully explain every detail of that strange morning in 1908. Despite the attraction of these fantastic ideas, most modern researchers began to focus on the concept of a stony asteroid or a comet fragment composed of ice and dust. They argued that such an object would not need to hit the ground to cause massive destruction. If it were fragile enough, the friction of the atmosphere would cause it to explode with the force of 1,000 suns, vaporizing the material before it could ever touch the soil. This would explain the radial pattern of the fallen trees and the complete absence of a crater. However, the debate remains far from settled. Every few decades, a new generation of researchers returns to the site with more advanced sensors and satellites, hoping to find a single grain of extraterrestrial material that could finally put the ghosts of 1908 to rest. The site has become a cathedral of unanswered questions, a place where the line between science and myth remains forever blurred. While the immediate devastation of the 1908 Tunguska event was confined to the remote Siberian taiga, its atmospheric ripple effects were observed across the entire northern hemisphere, creating a period of strange and unsettling celestial displays. For several nights following June 30, the skies over Europe, from the bustling streets of London to the quiet fjords of Scandinavia, glowed with an eerie, luminous intensity. The sun seemed to refuse to set completely, casting a twilight glow that stretched well past midnight. People in cities like Glasgow and St. Petersburg reported being able to read newspapers outdoors at 11 o'clock in the evening without the aid of artificial light. Amateur astronomers in England excitedly documented unusually bright noctilucent clouds, which appeared lower and more vibrant than ever before, shimmering with iridescent blues and greens. These anomalous sky phenomena were not immediately linked to the distant Siberian explosion. At the time, global communication was limited, and the concept of an event in one corner of the world affecting the skies thousands of miles away was almost unimaginable. Scientists and meteorologists struggled to explain the prolonged periods of what they called white nights or light evenings. Some speculated about unusual solar activity, while others attributed it to large-scale atmospheric dust from volcanic eruptions, though no major eruptions had been recorded around that time. The true scale of the Tunguska event and its capacity to inject massive amounts of dust and ice particles into the upper atmosphere would not be fully understood for decades. The persistent glow in the night sky was more than just a scientific curiosity. It was a phenomenon that touched the lives of ordinary people in a deeply unsettling way. For many, it felt like an omen, a strange sign from above that hinted at unseen forces at work. Artists painted the unusual skies, poets wrote about the extended twilight, and newspapers reported on the strange beauty and unsettling nature of the continuous light. It was as if the earth itself had exhaled a breath of shimmering dust into the heavens, a luminous shroud that veiled the planet in a soft, unnatural brilliance. This global atmospheric spectacle served as a silent, distant echo of the thunderous explosion in Siberia, a testament to the immense power of an event whose true nature remained shrouded in a veil of scientific uncertainty and cosmic wonder. In the decades following the mysterious event of 1908, the landscape of the Tunguska region became a living laboratory for the study of nature's resilience. The local Evenki people, who had lived in harmony with the taiga for generations, viewed the area with a mixture of reverence and fear. Many believed the site was cursed, and for years, nomadic groups avoided the epicenter, whispering stories of a fire that had descended from the heavens to swallow the forest. When explorers finally returned to the site in the late 1920s and 1930s, they found that while the millions of fallen trees were slowly rotting into the earth, a new and vibrant ecosystem was struggling to emerge from the ruins. The recovery of the forest was not uniform. In the very center of the blast, where the trees had remained standing but stripped of their life, the growth was stunted and strange. However, further out, the surge of energy and the sudden availability of sunlight caused the young birch and larch trees to grow at an accelerated rate, far faster than in the surrounding undisturbed forest. Scientists noted that the new vegetation seemed almost different on a cellular level, leading to decades of debate about whether the blast had left behind subtle chemical or even genetic traces. The massive swamps that covered the region had absorbed the heat and the pressure, hiding any small fragments of the celestial visitor deep within the permafrost, effectively sealing the evidence away from human eyes. As the middle of the 20th century approached, the Tunguska site became a magnet for scientific curiosity. Researchers from across the world were drawn to this remote corner of Siberia, fascinated by the way the earth had healed itself. They studied the growth rings of the surviving trees, which showed a dramatic change in thickness after 1908, acting as a natural clock that recorded the exact moment of the disaster. Despite the healing, the Great Dead Forest remained a haunting sight, a vast circular scar on the face of the planet that could be seen from the air. It served as a constant reminder that our world is part of a much larger and more violent cosmic neighborhood, where a single morning can change the history of a landscape forever. More than a century has passed since that fateful morning in 1908, yet the Tunguska event remains the greatest cosmic mystery of modern times. Despite hundreds of expeditions, thousands of soil samples, and the deployment of advanced satellite imaging, the heart of the Siberian taiga still refuses to give up its final secret. The site has become a place of pilgrimage for scientists, dreamers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Every year, when the short summer thaw arrives, new teams of researchers venture into the marshes, hoping to find a microscopic grain of rock or a chemical signature that will finally prove, once and for all, what kind of visitor descended from the stars. The legacy of Tunguska extends far beyond the borders of Russia. It served as a global wake-up call, forcing humanity to realize that our planet sits in a shooting gallery of space debris. The event led to the creation of international programs dedicated to tracking near-Earth objects, ensuring that we are never again caught off guard by a silent intruder from the depths of space. While we may never know if it was a stony asteroid, a frozen comet, or something even more exotic, the lesson of 1908 is clear. Our world is fragile, and its history can be rewritten in a single second. The scarred forest has mostly grown back, covering the fallen giants with a blanket of green, but the echoes of that massive explosion still vibrate through the halls of science, reminding us that some mysteries are meant to endure.